it's been the greatest displacement since World War II. This film it gives you a look at the human aspect of the refugee situation. I've been in refugee camps in Greece and Bosnia and seen it up close, that the hopelessness, the uncertainty, the fear, but also the hope. And I'm hoping you'll see some of that tonight. I want to introduce our panel tonight. I'm going to start down here with Miriam. How do you pronounce the last name? Kuttikat?
Kuttikat, yeah.
Okay. Dr. Miriam Kuttikat is a tenured associate professor of social work and the director of the Community Engaged Migration Research Lab at Virginia Commonwealth University School of Social Work. Dr. Kuttikat is the founder of the Richmond Dialogue, a Richmond community and community engaged migration research partnership that brings innovation to community-engaged migration inquiry that enriches migrants' experiences in the greater Richmond area. Her research team is focused on developing and testing evidence-based and culturally appropriate family-based health interventions. She has 14 years of clinical social work experience in the community mental health system. Next, Kate Ayers here at the end. Kate joined ReEstablish Richmond in 2013. Motivated by her participation in the Just Faith program, a class that focuses on social justice issues around the world. Holding a master's degree in teaching, she previously worked as a special education teacher and department chair in Hanover for 11 years, while also serving as a volunteer mentor for refugees in the Richmond community. Kate is currently a member of the Office of New Americans Advisory Board, and her dedicated efforts continue to build a supportive, trustworthy community for refugees and new immigrants living in Richmond. And finally, in the middle, Justin Gandy is the Deputy Director of the International Rescue Committee in Richmond. He joined the organization 14 years ago as an intern and volunteer mentor. He has since worked in a variety of roles and locations before coming to Richmond in 2019, where he oversees program implementation, resource development, and community engagement efforts for the growing Richmond office. Justin holds a bachelor's degree in international aid and development from the University of North Texas. So I want to thank you all for being here tonight. Thank you all for everything you do, especially for our refugees and immigrants who are here in the Richmond area. I want to start off asking you, and anybody can answer, or nobody can answer when you want, don't answer when you don't. But kind of give us a definition or the difference between an immigrant, a refugee, and an asylum seeker. I was just playing on it, so don't know my
So many easy answer. I'll take a stab at this one and keep it short. So a lot of similarities in some of those, but some key differences that are important, especially when you are engaging with media and how these different groups are portrayed. So I will start with refugees. So a refugee is somebody who has been displaced from their home and they have crossed an international border. Their displacement is rooted in a well-founded fear of persecution based on 5 distinct categories, and those are religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group or political group, and I'm going to pass on naming the last 2 because I'm blanking. But that well-rounded fear of persecution or violence drives them from their home, and they actually cross an international border to seek safety. So in the figures of displacement, this film was actually in 2017, so we're up to about like 87 million displaced individuals in the world, with about 44 million being internally displaced peoples. So those are people that have been also forced from their home but have not crossed an international border yet. So for example, Sudanese, driven from Sudan, South Sudan, going into Kenya for safety. The Karen or the Chen leaving Myanmar, going into Thailand for safety. That international border is what drives the distinction for refugee status. So you leave your home, you cannot return, and you are able to register with the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. And they interview you and they determine that you do meet the legal definition of a refugee. An asylum seeker can be very similar. We have asylum seekers coming up from Central America. They are fearing violence and conscription to violent gangs, and they're given the ultimatum: join our gang, support our mission, or face harm, right? So they are seeking safety, they are seeking shelter, but they do not meet necessarily the United Nations definition for refugee status. So they are arriving and they are seeking safety at our southern border, which is a legal right in the United States for them to do so, but they do not have that refugee status. So the media will use the term refugees, and they're very similar, but they are not the same political or immigration definition of a refugee. And then an immigrant, there's broad reasons for immigration. People move, they make choices. I would say, I guess, to put it succinctly, immigration sort of to me denotes a voluntary movement. Many times you're going abroad to study, or you have an advanced degree or a specialized skill set, and you are coming to the United States to work, or you're going to a school abroad, wherever that might be. So those are sort of the key differences amongst those.
Okay. Can somebody then explain? Maybe you've heard the term SIV, or Special Immigrant Visa. Can one of you tell us what that is, please?
Sure. Yeah. So a Special Immigrant Visa is a visa that was awarded to individuals, men and women, who supported the coalition of forces' interests in Iraq and Afghanistan. So these are men and women who offered their skills and services. Many of them were linguists, so they were our interpreters for military forces. Some were embassy workers, some were cultural ambassadors, some were safety security workers in the Green Zone in Iraq, or at the base in Afghanistan, wherever that might be. So these individuals have, for all intents and purposes, put their lives on the line to support U.S. interests. And through their service to our country and our men and women overseas, after 2 years of service, they are eligible to apply for an immigrant visa to come to the United States. So they are able to come to the United States. They're able to bring their family with them, because many times they have worked themselves into harm's way. Many individuals are working with the U.S. and then I've heard many stories of when they knew it was time that they needed to leave the community. So they're able to come and they're able to access the same U.S. refugee admissions program that we sort of refer to as resettlement. That's one of the benefits. And they actually arrive as green card holders, sort of as they've earned that status to travel to the U.S. So many individuals that we serve here in Richmond through the International Rescue Committee and Kate's group, ReEstablish Richmond, are SIV holders. I'll stop there.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we've heard some of the reasons that people leave their country. And so when they leave their country, of course, they're trying to get a better life. But what, if you were a refugee in Jordan or wherever else, and you wanted to come to, let's just say, the United States, can you all give us just I know it's a long process. Can you give us the process in a nutshell, to give us an idea of what it takes for someone to become or get to another country?
So the refugee process, the application, the interview, the intelligence screenings, is actually about a 24 to 36 month process in times where we have an administration that is supportive of resettlement. So let's say you have left Syria and you go into Lebanon or Jordan or Turkey. Like I said, you would register with the United Nations High Commission for Refugees, UNHCR, and then you would wait, and they will review all of your information, and they will set up some interviews. And there's multiple interviews that happen throughout this entire period of time. But they will gather all that information, and eventually yes or no, you will be rewarded or awarded the status of refugee. And then at that point, they would ask, if you wanted to be referred to for resettlement in a third country. So with refugees, there's sort of three ultimate solutions that happen with refugees. The first one is always the most desirable for families, and just in general, that whatever violence or whatever conflict subsides, and they're able to return home. Like you saw on the film, most of these families want to return home and resume their normal life. They are not looking to travel across the world and give up their livelihoods, their jobs, everything that they've ever known, to start completely from scratch. So that's the first desirable solution. Second is that you remain in the country of asylum, and you are able to work and have a livelihood and gain a semblance of life back. And then a very, very small percentage actually are able to resettle into a third country. I think less than 1% of all refugees are ever ultimately resettled into another country, with I think less than 0.1% ever coming to the United States. But once you're given refugee status, you are referred to the U.S. Refugee Admissions Program, which is run through our State Department. And then you will begin another lengthy process of background checks, biometric data gathering, interviews, etc., safety, security, vetting, and then you receive some orientation on what to expect. And then your case is referred to one of the 9 volunteer agencies across the country that provide resettlement services to newly arrived families. So, like I said, it's a very lengthy process, and that's a very chopped up version of it. But it's it's a 2-3 year plus process just to get through that. And then when you ultimately travel, it can be much, much longer than that. For our families coming from Congo, from DR Congo, the average length of displacement that we've seen is 14 years. From when they leave their home country, they go through the process, and when they are finally able to come to the United States, to begin from scratch is a 14-year wait. So you've got families that have known nothing but refugee camps before they ever arrive to the United States.
So the false claim of, I won't say false claim, for the projected claim that terrorists use the refugee process to get into other countries, especially the United States, is kind of far-fetched, what you said it takes.
I would support the false claim statement. Yes, that is, these individuals go through extremely long, arduous intelligence screening, multiple interviews. I think 5 separate intelligence agencies from the United States are involved in their review, with many being excluded from resettlement, just because some of their information is not verifiable. If there's any doubt, if there's any inconsistencies or possibility that we don't know, for certain, they won't travel.
Okay, so once a refugee gets, let's just use the United States. Once a refugee gets here to the United States, what are some of the challenges that they are going to face once they are here?
Is this on?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Well, I can let Justin's organization, International Rescue Committee, is the one who provides all the initial resettlement services. ReEstablish Richmond sort of fills in gaps and provides longer periods of support. And I think regardless of what point of the resettlement journey you're in, I think it's important to understand sort of the journey that people had before they arrived in the United States, which Justin just talked a little bit about, because those experiences very much determine what kinds of challenges people face here. I think no matter who you're talking to, I think they would feel like they're kind of starting from zero and from scratch and their lives over. But if you're someone from Afghanistan and you're a high-ranking official who was an interpreter, then you're starting from zero as having to drive Uber or work in a factory for your job again. Whereas someone, from DR Congo or Nepal, who's spent their entire lives in a refugee camp, they're starting from zero and just learning how to navigate a apartment life here in the United States and more of a westernized society. So I think, you know, understanding that is sort of what helps you understand where the challenges may come. You know, within the home of a lot of the Afghans that we worked with, you know, someone in the home, typically the male, was the SIV holder, the one who worked with the U.S. military, speaks English, highly educated, but they, you know, are married to someone that grew up during the Taliban regime the first time that the Taliban was in power, and so they, you know, a lot of the women are not educated and are illiterate in their native language. So, you know, the challenges begin with literacy and language, and then, you know, I'll let Justin talk a little bit about the challenges just within the resettlement system, but I think it's, yeah, just understanding the starting point it helps us understand the challenges.
Hi. Okay, so this is a nice segue for me to talk from an academic perspective. So for our work, mainly in refugee camps and also services here, and many research done in this area, we identified actually 3 main areas of challenges for every migrant, especially on refugees. So the first area is migration stressors, so that can be pre-migration and also the post-migration stressors. But fortunately, we have a lot of social service agencies like IRC and ReEstablish Richmond, First Baptist Church. We have a lot of agencies who provide that daily stress support, like ESL program, employment program, housing program. So all those ways they are arranging all those programs. But by the time they moved on to by like their 3rd year, 4th year, 5th year in settlement, they started thinking a lot about their health mainly through family conflict. So the family conflict became the second priority items after migrants moved to US. So mainly with the conflict, intergenerational conflict, parent-child, communication gap, and different styles of parenting, and all those pieces affect that family dynamics while they are settled here. And many parents feel they are still living in their origin country, and the children thinking they are American. So those kinds of, all those conflicts are happening. And then the 3rd section is the health program, mainly mental health. So again, with my clinical experience in this field, I can see most refugees or most migrants wanted to acknowledge they have a mental health problem after at least 8 years or more. Up until that time, they are focusing more on settling in, mainly focused on arranging migration stress issues like housing and all those pieces, and then they start realizing, so by the time it's like 8 to 12 years past, so they reach the point that the mental health issues are very higher pace, and it's very difficult to address that time. The unfortunate situation with the Richmond is we have very few agencies addressing the family conflicts, like family counseling, adolescent counseling, and also the aged migrant women. Aging, it's significantly affecting the migrant women who are reaching the point like 60 and above. So those are one of the area we're lacking in Richmond. And the next big piece is mental health. Psychiatrists who are trained in cultural competency. So we can't just take a training or certificate course to gain cultural competency, right? We have that passion to learn it from the clients themselves. So unfortunately, we don't have that many, I would say 1 or 2 psychiatrists who are trained in that. So those are the challenges I see directly to the migrants who come into Richmond area.
You've heard maybe you've heard people say, look, we've got a lot of homeless here in the country, we've got other problems. Why are we letting people, immigrants and refugees in? Tell me, why should we let folks in?
Because it's part of our value system as a society. It always has been. Refugee resettlement has always enjoyed bipartisan support. One of the biggest supporters of refugee resettlement was Reagan and George why do we, there's a lot of reasons as to why we want to continue refugee resettlement. Yeah, it is one of our values as a country. It helps with our international politics. There's a lot of reasons, and I don't want to get on a political soapbox, so I will stop there.
One of again, based on the value system, one thing we have to understand that migrants don't want to stay in another country. They are just here because they don't have a place to repatriate. So that's the big issue we need to understand and respect that. And the second part is we are gaining, like we used to use the language brain gain, right? These migrants who come in here, they may not be speaking the exact English language, but they have a lot of, their brain is so curious to learn. I'm teaching in this area for like 14 years now, and I see many students who are migrants, who are refugees, and their curiosity to give back to America. That is, something we have to think about, those kinds of things. And also, small-scale businesses. Around 30 to 35 to 45, between 30 to 40% of small-scale businesses run by migrants or refugees in this country. So those are, they are giving back. It's not like most of the people, once in a while you hear migrants did something like speeding ticket or whatever, but that is not the focus. The focus is they are providing a lot more than some cases many Americans do.
There's a website called New American Economy that does a lot of the analysis on the impact of immigration around our economy. And like you just said, I had some statistics. Immigrant workers make over 17% of Virginia's workforce. So you think about the detrimental effect that it would have on our workforce and our ability to run our society without that. Of that, their top 5 industries are things like taxi and limousines, nail salons, personal care, service to buildings, medical, physicians and surgeons, foreign-born workers, 30% of our physicians and surgeons. And think about how difficult it is to get a doctor's appointment. Health aides are 18%, nurses 14%. So these are some critical places that are, being filled by the immigrant community, but still need more people. So that, it's not that they're taking jobs that, those jobs would be open regardless.
And I think it might be New American Economy as well. It quotes like, if we need to put a monetary value to this issue, that this foreign-born workforce paid over $1.1 billion in taxes through their labor, not to mention the expertise that they're bringing to our country as well. So that state and federal taxes, I think it was 2019, was over $1.1 billion. So they're filling critical roles. Often I hear, well, who's going to do X job, or who's going to do this? Yeah, it might be, but they might also be your primary care physician as well. So there's no limitation on the skills and expertise that they're bringing to our country, and the monetary value that we all get to share in as well.
Well, we've heard a lot of positive value, and I agree wholeheartedly with immigrants for helping our country. Are there any times when immigration could be harmful?
One issue I have, we discuss in our classrooms how many migrants we can afford. How is there a percentage we can, US can afford to bring, and the resources. Is there any resources for to arrange settlement resources and all for these refugees? So that is a big concern for us. How much more we can provide. At the same time, many other countries who are not even taking enough refugees, like Scandinavian countries, right? So we, in a media survey, like Scandinavian countries are, trying to put themselves in the best in social welfare system and everything, but how many migrants they are taking, how many refugees they are taking actually. So those kinds of dialogue we need to discuss from a UNHCR perspective, not from, we are doing more than enough, as a US And the US immigration system is doing more than they can afford, but they're still welcoming people. But at the same time, we need to renegotiate with UNHCR about the quota system and based on the availability of resources in each country.
How can the United States help refugees overseas? You know, we saw the number of refugees in Jordan. Jordan's a country of 5 million people, and they've got 3 million refugees. I mean, in other countries, how can we help them?
You know, one of the things, I worked last 5 years, I spent a lot of my summer time in refugee camps in India. So one of the things I noticed is while they are in refugee camp, the refugees think about a repatriation approach. So helping to build the infrastructure in their country of origin. So that is a big way we can support refugees, and if they have an infrastructure there and war negotiations all happened, they will go from the refugee camp back to their own country. So that is another way to look at it. The issue, what I learned from research is that the money US government or any government to provide to build infrastructure there is more bigger than keeping them in the refugee camp. So that's why that issue coming up, not to provide enough stuff in infrastructure there. And other thing with my research, also with my experience, I can say many of the health-wise issues the refugee camp, the people in refugee camp facing, if we can address those issues right there itself, we can save a lot of money as a medical insurance or anything like that here in health-wise. So at refugee camp, they are not getting any of that kind of help, like health-wise help. So that may be a great way, especially with adolescents, working with adolescents in refugee camp, to have some kind of building up some confidence and focus through some skill-based training or anything that can add up for migration. And I just want to add one thing. I myself is a migrant from India, and I can honestly say, if I was there, I was still continuing to live in India, I won't have any identity of my own. Only because I'm a migrant, I was able to come here. Now I'm like helping other social workers, and they are also helping refugees and migrants. So this kind of chain of action happened only because of me, just one person came here. So you imagine how many more immigrants come here can do more and more.
I have just a couple more questions for you all. First, when refugees, how does the resettlement process, how does it take place once they're here? You know, like, how much support do they get? How much help do they get? What's the process once they get here?
Sure. So the IRC, International Rescue Committee, is one of the voluntary agencies that performs resettlement in partnership with the State Department. So when those cases are referred to the United States for resettlement, those cases are discussed and sort of allocated to each of our agencies, who then sends them to a field office. So essentially, I will make this very quick. It'll be a very, very high-level overview. So in normal times, outside of Afghan evacuations, etc., we get about a 2 weeks lead time when a case is coming. So they say, we've already reviewed the case, we've accepted it to our office, and then a month or two later, we get a 2-week notice that it's going to travel. So at that point, our staff moves into action to begin securing housing, to notify the health department, to notify the school systems. So we're making all of our pre-arrival preparations. Day one, a staff member is there and receives them at the airport. And hopefully we have permanent housing, which is one of the challenges that exists in Richmond and nationwide. But we get them into the housing, and then for the first 30 to 90 days, we're sort of working through what we call core services. So we are service planning with them. We are triaging any sort of urgent medical needs. We are referring mom and dad to ESL classes. We are getting the children enrolled into school system as soon as possible. We're getting them their refugee health assessments at the health department in a primary care home where they'll receive full physicals, etc. So all of this is happening first 30 days with ongoing case management through the 90th day. And then they're connected to ongoing services such as employment services, mental health supports, etc. So as far as what financial support they receive, make it very easy, $1,025 per person in their family. to completely restart their lives. So you can imagine for a family of 3 having $3,000 in their pocket, by the time we have put a security deposit down and paid their first month rent, the bank is pretty low for that family, right? So our families are connected to us ongoing support, and that might be TANF, which is available just for any low-income family, or there's specific programs through the Office of Refugee Resettlement, which pairs cash assistance with intensive job services. So we enroll families into that program, and our job is that they are working and economically self-sufficient by their 120th day in this country. So it is a very fast process that we move through, and honestly, families receive very limited financial support. So we are quickly service planning, moving the kids into school, and starting to look for jobs so that within 120 days, they are working and paying their bills. So that's a very broad overview. There's a lot of individual services that sort of exist in that environment that I could go into if asked.
And are they still required to repay their travel expenses?
So yes, that's another fun fact of refugee resettlement is if you are coming from Tanzania to the United States, that is not a free ticket. Families sign promissory notes that says, yes, my family of 7 will repay these flights beginning 6 months after I arrive. I will begin making monthly payments to repay you for our flight to the United States. So there's a lot that goes into it, and there's a lot of misinformation that exists about what is handed out to families. But these families receive very little, and then studies, statistics show that within a very short period, they have repaid in taxes far beyond what they receive to arrive to the United States.
Okay, last question for the group, and then we'll open it up to you all if you have questions. Looking at this film and hearing the stuff that refugees have to go through, and thank God for folks like you all who are there to help. But how can we help? How can the average person on the street help refugees abroad and at home?
I mean, I think it starts by showing up and watching movies and learning and being open to the experiences and being open to being around people from different cultures who don't speak English. I think, we all, Justin and I can definitely share with you some volunteer opportunities if you want to become a volunteer, an English tutor, a driver, a home mover, whatever it is that we may have for our own individual programs. But I think, broadly speaking, it really has to do with educating. It has to do with, seeking out opportunities to get involved, whether you get involved here locally or internationally. I know Steve has asked me to go with him many times to all of his trips, and I'm hopeful to go one day. So I think that there's lots of ways to stay connected, both actively and just learning. I think, you were talking about when is immigration harmful to communities, and my experience is that I've only seen helpful and beautiful things come out of when local communities here come together and welcome newcomers. And I think that, Richmond is a really cool place, and that has been my experience as I've seen the communities, faith communities, just really come together and I know that between Justin and I, we get contacted by many community members and organizations that are just like, we want to help, we want to do something. And so I think knowing that spirit is here makes a big difference, and it makes newcomers feel welcome.
Saying on the film, you saw the mother sitting and saying, we're people too, we're people. And unfortunately, in the political dialogue and the media dialogue, there's a political value to othering people and creating divisiveness and fear and with misinformation. And I think how to combat that and how you support refugees as simple as being an ESL tutor and learning that this family sitting across the table is just like your family. I was sharing with Steve, I've done this for 14 years, and now I'm a little bit older, and now I have 3 kids, and now I'm sitting across the table from another man who is a husband and a father who is trying to get his family back to a safe place, back to a stable place. In those relationships, you don't have to take on, you don't have to dedicate 40 hours a week. If you are an ESL tutor and you share that experience with your friends and you say, hey, like, this is a beautiful family and I'm so glad they're here, that is advocacy, that is supporting that family tangibly. So there's, between our organizations, there's opportunities to volunteer if you have 30 minutes a week, and you can be a homework helper for refugee students, or you have Friday afternoons off and you can take people to a medical appointment. There's lots of small and easy ways to do it, but if you don't have time, and I know not everybody does have time, there's ways of supplying items that families need, or financially, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a whole host of ways for individuals in the community to support refugees here locally in your own backyard.
So one place I would say is our public school system. And after working, volunteering many times in Chesterfield County Public Schools, I noticed that there's not enough people for Spanish teacher. There's not that many people teach, to hire the Spanish teachers, so we can help if anyone knows that language, go and help, learn, to teach the children about how to learn the English. Many of the school announcements are in English, where these children who speak Spanish sitting there not knowing anything about what's going on at school. So that's one clear example I learned from a couple of schools in Chesterfield County. So in these places we can bring parents who know Spanish also, or I can personally with the social work school, there we have so many interns who speak Spanish, so bring them to the schools and taking that role. So that's one thing. And the second thing I notice is, it's just us, our thinking is like, we talk about Indian food, Ethiopian food, Somalian food, all these food, but there are people behind these food items and they need our support, they need someone to talk, just maybe once a month, they need someone to talk. So thinking that and teaching our children about it, talking to our neighbors about it, talking in the church, that may have more impact on anything else you can do, maybe financially, more than financially, you can do.
Okay, does anybody here have a question? Going back here.
I'm not talking into the You said that the people coming to the United States southern border were asylum seekers and were not refugees. Is UNHCR present at the southern border? Is there a possibility for folks to approach them and say, I think I deserve refugee status?
So as far as I understand, UNHCR is not present in that. What I do know is within the State Department, the office within the State Department that runs the resettlement program is called the Bureau for Populations, Refugees, and Migrants. I do know they do international work, and they are investing more money to build capacity in South America and Central America to begin recognizing refugees as they leave their primary country. So they are trying to build a capacity. What we've seen is sort of the route to the United States is they want to build capacity through Central and South America that they can recognize refugees as soon as they leave their primary country, their home country, so that they would be recognized with that status without having to travel such a far distance, often on foot, to seek asylum at a country that not always honors that legal right. So as far as I understand, the United Nations is not present on our southern border interviewing, doing any sort of registration for families. They're seeking asylum with the United States.
Okay, anybody else have a question? Okay.
Are you aware of any group of immigrants that are given special tax exempt for having a business? I'm I've been approached by people that say that, immigrants come here and the reason why they get ahead of native people, or not native, but Americans, is because when they come here, they get like 5 years tax-free status. I can't say because I don't know, but you guys are more schooled on this than I am, so can you educate me? Thank you.
That would be news to me. No, I am not a business school academic or anything like that, but I do know that, with the micro enterprise programs that I've run with the IRC, they are educated on how to start a business, the tax burdens associated with that, the accounting that is necessary to file taxes appropriately, etc. I can't speak with certainty, but I have never heard that immigrants or refugees get preferential treatment as far as entrepreneurship.
Tax exempt.
Tax
For 5
exempt.
years, they don't have to pay any taxes.
Never, I don't believe that exists.
Well, thank you.
Forthcoming. Try to leave the door open in case I'm wrong, but I honestly do not believe that is true at all. So.
Anybody else have a question?
I just have a question. Is there any Ukrainian refugees, migrants are coming, any information related to that?
So, I think everybody may be aware, President Biden has said the U.S. will welcome 100,000 Ukrainian refugees fleeing Russian aggression. So the IRC, we have worked with a small number of Ukrainian families over the last few years. That is through a separate program, an immigration program called the FSU Lautenberg program. It is for persecuted minorities in former Soviet Union countries. So through that program, we've received a handful of Ukrainian families coming to Richmond. Now, as far as from this acute crisis, I imagine we will receive some here locally in Richmond. But what we are hearing as of this week is that there's no plan to sort of do what happened with Afghanistan as far as a mass evacuation and travel. So what the government is planning on doing, as far as most recent information I have, is that they're going to begin expediting those family reunification applications, and then that they are going to begin processing those referrals directly to the U.S. Refugee Admission Program. So with normal refugee crisis, there is a lag, there is a delay for all the bureaucratic process to play out. So while I fully expect Richmond, my office, and Richmond community as a whole to receive Ukrainian families, I don't believe it will happen over the next couple of months. I think it will have to go through the normal channels and make sure that everything is there and that there's capacity to receive them and provide services as usual.
I have a quick question. When it comes to your Ukrainian immigrants, I know it's a young boy, so.
Okay, go ahead.
When it comes to your Ukrainian immigrants, first of all, first part of the question is, have you noticed the difference between Eastern Ukraine versus Western Ukraine immigrants?
I could not speak to that directly.
Okay. Second, I'm assuming most immigrants have been coming since 2014 from Ukraine. Has there been any specific unique challenges that just the general public doesn't know about the Ukrainian immigration?
For the families that IRC has served, I haven't noticed any noteworthy differences in their resettlement process or their needs in resettlement. The families, like I said, that we are receiving are through family reunification, so they do enjoy sort of a support network that other refugees arriving to Richmond do not have. And sort of that reunification process sort of denotes, at least a small community able to support them. So I would say that's a particular difference because that has been the primary way that Ukrainian families have been arriving over the last several years.
What's the largest group of refugees in Richmond, would you all guess?
In the last, probably 6 years, the arrivals coming into Richmond have been about 70% Afghan, and then this year it's like 99.9% are individuals from Afghan. I think the last time you reported it was like 600 and some people have come into Richmond since October, and all but 15 were from Afghanistan, so that really has changed a little bit.
With the previous administration, there was limitations put on other refugee resettlement. So one of the key differences with the SIV program is that it's run through the Department of Defense, which is less politically vulnerable to changes, right? So the majority of the Afghan families are coming through SIV status. So for us, you know, the last several years have been very primarily Afghan and SIV families coming. Secondarily, you know, DR Congo, and then we splinter out to a lot of different nationalities. This year, which began in October, yes, we're between our agency and Commonwealth Catholic Charities, which is another one of the agencies doing the initial resettlement process. The Richmond community has received about 650 refugees, refugee, SIV, and Afghan parolees, with about, like 90-something% being Afghan, particularly.
And just so you know, okay, I want to
You kind of led into the question that I was going to ask about, because we had a meeting some months ago with Commonwealth Catholic Charities and ReEstablish Richmond during the whole Afghanistan crisis, and where they were coming to Fort Lee, and then they were going to be, you know, sent to different places. And so I'm interested to know, to hear how many are still in the Richmond area, because at that time there were lots of predictions on how many it might be. Where are most of those people in the Richmond area?
Sure, that goes back to our housing challenge. So historically, resettlement in the Richmond community, a lot of it is in West Henrico. So there's some benefits to the Western Henrico region that sort of have reinforced that. Great schools, very welcoming, responsive school system. The local DSS, social service offices are very responsive and work well with the agencies. And there's some housing partners, some larger complexes that will work with newcomers who arrive with no social, no credit history, right? So those are key barriers that we have to overcome. Now, the housing crisis that is facing the entire country, not just refugees, is that housing prices are spiking. So with the Afghan crisis, with such a fast influx, you know, we did have to just really find any housing that would work with a newcomer. So it's a little bit more spread out than it has been historically. You know, some East End, some North Side, some south of the river, etc. But as far as a total number, since Fort Lee happened right at the beginning of August, so I know my office has received since August 1, I think it was 474 individuals. That's Afghan parolee and other, with the vast majority being Afghan parolee. Commonwealth Catholic Charities has received, I'll estimate, about 250 Afghan parolees. So all told, we're about 600 plus that are staying here locally.
And weren't there about 6,000 at Fort Lee at one time?
Yeah, the capacity of Fort, I was at Fort Lee. Yeah, I was there. The capacity was about 5,500, I believe, and that's. So initially, the Afghan evacuation was limited to just SIVs, so people that had applied for SIV and had completed the intelligence process, but as the situation deteriorated, it really became an all-out evacuation, and they were prioritizing people that were particularly vulnerable, female journalists, provincial judges, etc. So that's where it really ballooned up. So I think across Virginia, I want to say 5,000, about 5,000 have stayed locally, and that's out of 78,000 evacuees that have since come into Virginia and then elsewhere and have resettled across the country.
Yeah, there's a lot of misinformation on that.
That's
Now,
yeah.
there was 200,000 at Fort Pickett.
There was a lot of bad info. We had very well-intentioned people showing up at our office with like U-Hauls full of donations, and I was like, no, like we're not running the operation. Like, take that to Fort Lee. I have nowhere to put all this stuff.
Well, before we go, I just want to ask each of you a little bit. You had a question?
I just wondered if you could share your contact information. If like there are churches who are wanting to get involved, where do we email or call?
Yeah, if you want to come up afterwards, each person can give you their contact information. That might be the easiest way to do it, and I have it as well. So Miriam, can you very briefly tell us what the Community Engaged Migration Research Lab does?
Yeah, so Social School of Social Work, we up until last year we were doing individual research work with migrants and all. Now we are collaborating with different researchers across PCU, like social work, mathematics, applied statistics, and all these departments, and working with community agencies to develop research, migration research, based on their needs, whatever the community agencies want, what kind of research, what kind of outcome they want to hear from us. So we are working with the agencies to develop design research based on their needs, and then identifying developing interventions and implementing it in the field. So, and our social work students will also work with each agencies to develop the plans for each of these programs. So it's not only just agencies, but different churches if they want to involve in things. So anyone in Greater Richmond area, we can meet and talk about the needs and what the priority items, and we can work with and develop some program for that. And we are also in the process of developing a certificate program in migration studies. So the instructors or anyone who wants to take the courses, we are proposed to start that in 23 fall. Maybe 1 year extension, maybe 24 fall, but otherwise it will be happening very soon. So those are the different areas. And also, we are working with students who wanted to do international field internships and supervision, getting supervision there, and also working with migration data in those countries. So those kinds of different components we have.
And Kate, we know that ReEstablish is not a resettlement agency, but tell us what ReEstablish does real quick, please.
Yeah, we were founded in 2020. I feel like Miriam, were you on the?
Yes,
She was a founding board member. I don't think you were. I wasn't part of the agency at that point, but Miriam was actually a founding board member. And as I was driving down Broad Street this evening to get here, I looked over at the Hofheimer building in Scott's Addition. Was actually the initial location of where ReEstablish Richmond was going to hopefully be, and we were going to hopefully provide some affordable housing, free housing for refugees for the first few months. There's a lot of beautiful things, but what we ended up doing 10, 11 years later is filling in gaps and sort of building on the work that agencies like the Ayers does. So we're most known for our transportation independence program, helping people get their driver's license. We have a very active volunteer engagement program where we work with matching families with English tutors and helping them get their citizenship. Mentors, Sarah back in the back is one of our longtime mentors and English tutors. And we run a small job certification program around sewing. So and work a little bit with the IRC with youth mentorship as well.
Okay, and so you've heard IRC is one of two resettlement agencies between them and Commonwealth Catholic Charities. Those are the only two resettlement agencies in the Richmond area. There are, what, 4 in Virginia?
There's Church World Service up in Harrisonburg, Catholic Charities actually out in Roanoke, Richmond, Newport News, and Northern Virginia, Lutheran Immigration or Lutheran Family Services in Northern Virginia, and us. But like each affiliate, so I believe there's 4, but they have multiple sites.
Yeah, multiple sites.
Yes.
Well, I want to thank you all so much for all the work that you do. It is extremely important. And I want to thank you all for having the interest to come out on a Saturday night and hear about what's going on. And to realize that each person in here has the power to do something. It's not just one of these huge problems that you can sit back and go, oh, there's nothing I can do, why? But you can do something. You have the power, and I personally believe we all have the responsibility to do something to help these new Americans as they are here. And if possible, to help the folks overseas as well. Because as we've heard, very, very few ever make it here. 86 million around the world, and lost without a home. And, so anyway, I just encourage you to find out what you can do and then put your full effort into it. Whether it's supporting these agencies, the works up here, the work at VCU or whatever, just find something, please. And thank you so much for coming. Thank you all, and you all have a blessed night.